The massive hall of the Galactic Council Station buzzed with hundreds of different voices. Ambassador Kim Hanna sat quietly in her chair, watching the other alien delegates argue about trade rules. She tapped notes into her small computer while listening to the endless complaints about humanity. The meeting room was huge, with curved walls that reached up to a glass dome. Through the clear ceiling, she could see the stars and 3 different colored moons hanging in space. The station orbited around a neutral planet that no species claimed as their own. This made it the perfect place for all the different alien races to meet and talk. Hannah had been to dozens of these meetings, but today felt different. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every few minutes, another alien would stand up and point at the human section while complaining about something Earth had done. The Zephyrians were blue-skinned creatures with large eyes and no hair. Their trade minister waved his 4 arms around as he spoke through a translation device that turned his clicking sounds into words everyone could understand. The humans move too fast, he said, his voice getting louder. They build settlements on new worlds before we even finish our surveys. They make friends with species we have never heard of. How can we trust people who do everything so quickly? Several other aliens nodded their heads in agreement. The Zephyrians had been trading in space for over 2,000 years. They were used to taking decades to make simple decisions. Humans had only been in space for less than a century, but they were already everywhere. Near the front of the room, the Vorthack representative made musical sounds that the translator turned into speech. The Vorthack looked like walking crystals that changed color when they talked. Humans keep too many secrets. The crystal being sang. They have computer systems we cannot break into. They have codes we cannot read. How do we know what they are really planning? Hannah looked over at her assistant, Park Jiho, who sat next to her taking his own notes. Jiho was young but smart, and he had warned her that today's meeting would be difficult. More and more species were getting worried about how fast humans were spreading across the galaxy. The Corvin delegate stood up next. The Corvins were big, hairy creatures that looked like bears walking on 2 legs. Their species loved to fight, and they respected strength above everything else. Humans are dangerous, the Corvin war leader growled. They smile and offer help, but we have heard stories. They destroyed their own planet's environment. They fought wars that killed millions of their own people. What happens when they decide we are their enemies? This comment made several smaller species shift nervously in their seats. The rabbit-like Pequenians huddled closer together. The insect-like Thraxians clicked their mandibles in worried patterns. Even some of the bigger, stronger species looked uncomfortable. Hannah sighed quietly. These were the same fears that came up at every meeting. Yes, humans had made mistakes on Earth. Yes, they had fought wars and damaged their planet. But they had also learned from those mistakes. They had cleaned up their world and stopped fighting each other. Now they were trying to help other species avoid the same problems. The session moderator was a tall, thin alien with pointed ears called a Vulcan. Vulcans were known for being logical and fair. "Are there any other concerns before we move to the main topic?" she asked in her calm voice. A new voice spoke up from the back of the room. It belonged to a Regalian, a species that looked almost human, but with pale blue skin and silver hair. "We have noticed that humans always seem ready for anything," the Regalian scientist said. "When disasters happen, they arrive with exactly the right help. When trade problems occur, they have solutions ready. It makes us wonder, are they causing these problems so they can look like heroes when they fix them?" The accusation hit the room like a bomb. Several aliens started talking at once, their voices rising as they discussed this new possibility. Were humans secretly manipulating events across the galaxy? Hannah felt her stomach drop. She knew this wasn't true, but she could see how it might look suspicious to outsiders. Humans were good at solving problems because they spent a lot of time thinking about what could go wrong and how to fix it. They prepared for disasters before they happened. But the species that didn't think this way, it probably did look strange. The arguing got louder. Some aliens defended humans, while others shared their own suspicious stories. The Vulcan moderator hit her gong several times, trying to get everyone to calm down and speak one at a time. Hannah realized that this meeting was going to be much worse than Jiho had predicted. The fears and suspicions had been building for months, and now they were all coming out at once. Something needed to be said to calm everyone down and explain how humans really thought. She looked around the room at all the different species, some friendly, some neutral, some clearly hostile. Each one had their own culture, their own way of thinking, their own fears about the future. Somehow, she needed to find the right words to bridge all these differences. The time had come for her to speak. When the arguing finally died down, Ambassador Kim Hanna stood up from her seat. The huge room became quiet as hundreds of alien eyes turned to look at her. She walked slowly to the speaking platform in the center of the room, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Hannah had given many speeches before, but this felt different. She could feel the suspicion and fear radiating from the alien delegates like heat from a fire. Some leaned forward in their seats, waiting to hear what excuse she would give. Others sat back with their arms crossed, already deciding not to believe anything she said. "Thank you for sharing your concerns," Hannah began, her voice calm and steady. The translation devices around the room hummed as they turned her words into dozens of different languages. "I understand why you might be worried about humanity's actions in the galaxy. Change is always frightening, especially when it happens quickly." The Zephyrian Trade Minister made a clicking sound that meant he was still angry. The crystal Vorthak representative glowed a deep red color, which Hannah knew meant suspicion in their culture. Even the peaceful rabbit like Pequenians twitched their noses nervously. "Humans believe that preparation is the key to success," Hannah continued. "We have learned from our history that problems are easier to solve when you think about them before they happen. This is why we study every situation carefully and make plans for different possibilities." She paused and took a sip of water from the glass on the podium. The room remained completely silent, waiting for her to continue. Hannah could see Jiho in the audience, giving her an encouraging nod. "We do not cause problems so we can solve them," she said, addressing the Rigelian's earlier accusation. "We simply try to understand what could go wrong, so we can help when it does. This is how humans survived on our dangerous planet for thousands of years." Several aliens shifted in their seats. The Corvinth war leader grunted, which could mean either agreement or disagreement with the species. The insect-like Thraxians clicked their mandibles in a pattern that sounded almost like applause. Hannah felt like the speech was going well. The tension in the room seemed to be decreasing slightly. Maybe she could actually convince these species that humans meant no harm. "In fact," she said, trying to sound reassuring, "our diplomatic and military departments work very hard to understand all of our galactic neighbors. We have detailed studies and response plans for every possible situation that might arise with each species in this room." The words left her mouth before she realized how they would sound. What she meant as proof of human thoughtfulness and care suddenly sounded like something much more sinister. The effect was immediate and terrible. The silence that had been respectful became shocked and frightened. Translation devices stopped humming as their operators forgot to breathe. Even the air recycling system seemed to get quieter. Hannah's stomach dropped as she realized what she had just said. To her, having plans meant being prepared to help. To the aliens in the room, having plans meant being prepared to attack. The first reaction came from the Corvinth war leader. He jumped to his feet so fast that his chair fell over backward with a loud crash. "You admit it," he roared, his voice so loud that the translation devices squeaked with feedback. "You have been planning against us all along." The crystal Vorthak representative flashed bright orange, which meant extreme anger in their culture. Their musical voice became harsh and discordant as they spoke. "We knew humans could not be trusted. You have been studying us like laboratory animals." Within seconds, the entire room exploded into chaos. Aliens jumped from their seats, some shouting accusations, while others activated emergency communicators to contact their home planets. The peaceful atmosphere that Hannah had been trying to create shattered like glass. The rabbit-like Pequenians huddled together in terror, their large eyes wide with fear. The insect Thraxians made angry buzzing sounds and waved their sharp claws in the air. Even species that had been friendly to humans looked shocked and betrayed. "Wait, please let me explain." Hannah called out, but her voice was lost in the noise. The translation devices were overloading as dozens of species tried to speak at once in their own languages. Geo had moved from his seat and was now standing near the platform, ready to help if needed. His face was pale, and Hannah could see the worry in his eyes. This was turning into a diplomatic disaster. The Vulcan moderator stood up and hit her ceremonial gong over and over again, trying to restore order. But the sound was barely audible over the shouting and arguing that filled the room. Some of the smaller species were already heading for the exits, their diplomatic immunity protecting them as they fled. The larger, more aggressive species were forming groups, probably planning some kind of response to what they saw as a human threat. Hannah realized that her attempt to reassure the galactic community had backfired completely. What was meant to be a simple explanation of human preparedness had been interpreted as a confession of hostile intent. The damage was spreading beyond the council chamber itself. She could see delegates activating long-range communicators, sending emergency messages to their governments across the galaxy. Soon, every species in known space would hear that humans had been secretly planning against them. The diplomatic crisis she had been trying to prevent was now inevitable. The council chamber had turned into complete madness. Ambassador Kim Hannah stood at the podium, watching her worst nightmare come true. Aliens were shouting, pointing fingers, and making angry gestures in her direction. The peaceful diplomatic meeting had become something that looked more like a war council. The Corvinth war leader was the loudest voice in the chaos. His bear-like face was twisted with rage as he stomped toward the human section. "Show us these plans," he demanded, his massive fists pounding on the nearest table. "We want to see what scenarios you have prepared for the Corvinth Empire. Are you planning to invade our worlds? Steal our resources?" Behind him, other Corvin delegates were pulling out their communication devices and speaking rapidly in their growling language. Hannah didn't need a translator to know they were calling their military commanders back home. The crystal Vorthack representative had turned a bright, angry red color and was making harsh musical sounds that hurt everyone's ears. "This proves everything we suspected," they sang in their discordant voice. "All human settlements in Vorthack space will be removed immediately. All trade agreements are canceled. All diplomatic contact is ended." Other Vorthack crystals in the chamber began glowing the same angry red, creating a pulsing light that made the entire room look like it was on fire. Their beautiful music had become an ugly noise that made several smaller aliens cover their ears in pain. The insect-like Thraxians were clicking their mandibles so fast it sounded like machine gun fire. Their leader, a massive creature with 6 arms and glowing green eyes, stood on his chair and buzzed loudly. "The hive mind has decided," he announced. All Thraxian colonies will prepare defensive measures against possible human aggression. Even worse, the smaller and more peaceful species were panicking. The rabbit-like Pequenians were huddled together in a corner, their large ears flat against their heads in terror. Their leader was speaking quickly into a communicator, probably ordering their tiny fleet to run and hide somewhere safe. The bird-like avians had spread their colorful wings in a threat display and were making loud, screeching sounds. The slug-like gastropods were leaving trails of nervous slime as they slid quickly toward the exits. Hannah tried again to speak, but her voice couldn't be heard over the noise. She looked desperately at Jiho, who was now standing right next to the platform with his hand on his emergency communicator. His face was white with worry. "Please, honor delegates," she called out as loud as she could. "You're misunderstanding what I meant." A few aliens near the front heard her and turned to listen, but their faces showed no trust. The damage had already spread too far to stop with simple words. The situation got even worse when some species began forming alliances against humanity. The Zephyrian Trade Minister was talking rapidly with the Regalian scientists, their blue and pale blue heads close together as they whispered. They kept glancing at the human section with suspicious eyes. The Andorian delegation had moved to sit with the Tellarite mining representatives. Both species had been neutral toward humans before, but now they looked like they were planning something together. The Andorians were known for their strong military, while the Tellarites controlled important mining operations across 3 star systems. Even some of humanity's former friends were turning away. The Betazoid counselor, who had always been kind to Hannah in previous meetings, was now staring at her with a look of deep disappointment. The Betazoids could read emotions. so she probably knew that Hannah was telling the truth about meaning no harm. But political pressure was stronger than personal feelings. The worst part was watching the news spread beyond the council chamber. Delegates were using their personal communicators to send messages to their home governments. Emergency diplomatic channels were lighting up across the galaxy as the shocking news traveled at faster-than-light speed. Hannah could imagine what was happening on dozens of different worlds. Military commanders would be called from their beds. Emergency cabinet meetings would be starting. Fleet movements would begin as species prepared to defend themselves against a human threat that didn't actually exist. The Vulcan moderator had given up trying to restore order with her gong. Instead, she was speaking quietly into her own communicator, probably calling for security forces to prevent the meeting from turning into an actual fight. Some species were already leaving. The pack-led delegation, simple people who usually stayed out of political arguments, were walking quickly toward the exit. The Cardassians, who were always suspicious of everyone anyway, had left as soon as the chaos started. But the most frightening reaction came from the Romulans. They hadn't said anything at all. They just sat quietly in their section, watching everything with calculating eyes. Hannah knew that silent Romulans were much more dangerous than angry ones. They were probably already planning how to use this crisis to their advantage. Jiho finally activated his emergency communicator and spoke rapidly into it. Priority 1 message to Earth Command, he said in Korean, thinking that other species wouldn't understand. Diplomatic crisis in progress. Request immediate assistance from General Lee or Admiral Park. The response came back in seconds. Help is coming. Try to keep everyone calm until we arrive. But looking around the chaotic chamber, Hannah wondered if it was already too late to prevent a galactic war. Within minutes of Gio's emergency call, the air above the podium began to shimmer with blue light. The holographic projection system activated, and slowly, the image of a man in military uniform appeared. The chaos in the chamber quieted slightly as aliens stopped shouting to stare at the new arrival. General Lee Miho stood straight and tall, even though he was just a hologram being projected from Earth. His uniform was perfectly pressed, and his face showed the calm confidence of someone who had dealt with many crises before. He looked around the room, taking in the angry aliens and the tense atmosphere. Honored delegates of the Galactic Council, he said in a clear, strong voice, I am General Lee Miho of Earth Strategic Defense Command. I understand there has been a serious misunderstanding about our preparedness protocols. The Corvinth war leader snarled and pointed at the hologram. No misunderstanding. Your ambassador admitted that humans have secret plans to attack every species here. General Lee turned to face the angry bear-like alien without showing any fear. That is not what she said, and that is not what those plans are for. Allow me to explain how humans think about preparation. He paused and looked around the room again, making eye contact with as many delegates as possible. Humans do not just make contingency plans for other species. We make plans for everything that could possibly go wrong. The Crystal Vorthak representative made a questioning musical sound. What do you mean by everything? I mean everything, General Lee repeated. We have detailed plans for what to do if our sun suddenly gets brighter or dimmer. We have plans for if the Earth's magnetic field disappears. We have plans for if a giant asteroid comes toward our planet. We have plans for if our computers all stop working at the same time. Several aliens looked confused. The rabbit-like Pequenians tilted their heads in that way they did when they didn't understand something. We have plans for what to do if diseases spread too quickly, the general continued. We have plans for if our economy crashes. We have plans for if our food supply runs out. We have plans for if other planets stop trading with us. The Zephyrian trade minister clicked his tongue, which meant he was thinking hard. But why do you need so many plans? Most of those things will never happen. General Lee smiled slightly. That is exactly the point. We make plans for things we hope will never happen, so that if they do happen, we know what to do. He gestured toward Ambassador Hannah, who was still standing at the podium, looking worried. When Ambassador Kim mentioned plans for every species in this room, she was talking about contingency plans. Plans for how to help if you have problems. Plans for how to communicate better. Plans for how to work together if there's a crisis. The insect Thraxian leader buzzed quietly. You make plans to help us? Yes, General Lee said firmly. But we also make plans for what to do if you decide you don't want our help. We make plans for what to do if you become angry with us. We even make plans for what to do if you attack us, though we hope that will never be necessary. This statement made several aliens shift nervously in their seats, but General Lee wasn't finished. Most importantly, he said, his voice getting slightly harder, we make plans for what to do if our own government becomes corrupt and starts hurting people. We make plans for what to do if our own leaders become dictators. We make plans for what to do if humans start acting like the monsters you are afraid we might become. The room became very quiet. This was something most aliens had never considered. The idea of planning against your own species was almost unthinkable to most galactic civilizations. The Vulcan moderator leaned forward in her chair. You prepare for the possibility that your own government might become your enemy? Absolutely, General Lee replied without hesitation. Human history is full of governments that started good, but became bad over time. We have learned that eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. We watch our leaders carefully, and we are always ready to remove them if they betray the people they are supposed to serve. The Betazoid counselor, who could sense emotions, suddenly looked very surprised. You are telling the truth, she said softly. You really do plan against yourselves. We plan against everyone and everything, General Lee confirmed. Not because we want to fight, but because we want to survive. Our planet tried to kill us with volcanoes, earthquakes, storms, diseases, and dangerous animals for millions of years. We learned that the only way to live is to always be ready for the worst possible thing to happen. He looked directly at the Corvinth War leader. Having a plan for fighting you doesn't mean we want to fight you. It means we want to be ready if fighting becomes necessary. Just like having a plan for helping you doesn't mean we think you are weak. The bear-like alien sat back in his chair, looking thoughtful instead of angry for the first time since the crisis began. This is what humans call death world thinking, General Lee explained. We prepare for disaster so that when disaster comes, we are ready to protect not just ourselves, but everyone around us. General Lee's words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. The massive council chamber was quieter than it had been all day, with hundreds of alien delegates sitting in thoughtful silence. Ambassador Kim Hanna could see the change happening in their faces as they processed what they had just heard. The first alien to speak was the Zephyrian Trade Minister. He stood up slowly, his blue skin looking pale under the chamber lights. General Lee, he said carefully, last year when the Crystal Plague hit our outer colonies, human medical ships arrived within 3 days. They had treatments ready that worked immediately. Was that Contingency Plan Zephyrian Medical 47, General Lee confirmed without hesitation. We had studied 17 different plague scenarios that could affect silicon-based life forms like your people. Your colonists lived because we had already figured out how to save them before they got sick. A wave of surprise rippled through the chamber. The Zephyrians looked at each other with wide eyes, realizing that what they had seen as suspicious human interference was actually careful preparation to help them. The crystal Vorthak representative's angry red glow faded to a soft blue color that meant curiosity. Their musical voice became gentler as they spoke. The economic stabilization protocols you offered during our trade crisis 6 months ago. Ambassador Hanna stepped forward. We had already run computer simulations on 43 different market collapse scenarios involving crystal-based economies. We knew exactly what would work to fix your problems because we had practiced solving them many times. More aliens began connecting the dots. The bird-like avians remembered how human ships had arrived quickly with food supplies when storms destroyed their harvest worlds. The slug-like gastropods recalled human engineers appearing with perfect solutions when their slime production facilities broke down. The rabbit-like Pequenians, who were still huddled together nervously, whisper among themselves in their squeaky voices. Finally, their leader stood up. When space pirates attacked our trade routes, human patrol ships were there in hours. You saved our cargo vessels. Pequenian Defense Scenario 23, General Lee said with a slight smile. Small, peaceful species often get picked on by raiders. We keep patrol routes ready to help you. The transformation in the room's atmosphere was remarkable. Fear and anger were being replaced by wonder and gratitude. Aliens who had been shouting accusations minutes before were now looking embarrassed about their reactions. The Corvinth War leader, the biggest and angriest of all the delegates, slowly got to his feet. His bear-like face showed confusion rather than rage. You plan to help us even though we are warriors? Even though we have threatened you. Especially because you are warriors, General Lee replied. Strong species like the Corvinth often face different problems than peaceful ones. You might need help dealing with internal conflicts or assistance when your warrior culture clashes with diplomatic situations. We have plans for helping with those problems too. The war leader sat down heavily, looking stunned. My people, we respect strength and preparation. What you describe, this is true warrior thinking. Always ready, always vigilant, always protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Other military-minded species began nodding in agreement. The Andorians, known for their tactical skills, looked impressed. The Cardassians, usually suspicious of everyone, seemed genuinely surprised by the thoroughness of human planning. But it was a Rigelian scientist who asked a question that changed everything. General Lee, would you be willing to teach other species how to do this kind of planning? Our governments often face crises we are not prepared for. Of course, General Lee replied immediately. Sharing knowledge makes everyone stronger and safer. The Vulcan moderator stood up, her logical mind already working on the implications. I propose the establishment of a new galactic protocol, a system where species can voluntarily share contingency planning expertise and prepare for crises together. The preparedness protocol, Ambassador Hannah suggested, finally finding her voice again. The idea spread to the chamber like wildfire. Aliens began talking excitedly about problems their governments faced and how human-style planning might help solve them. The Zephyrians wanted help with their slow decision-making processes. The Thraxians needed assistance planning for individual thinking instead of just hive mind responses. Even former enemies were interested. The Romulans, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, sent a message that they would consider participating in certain limited aspects of the protocol. Within 2 hours, the preparedness protocol was approved by unanimous vote. It would be voluntary, with each species sharing only what they felt comfortable revealing. The goal was mutual aid and crisis prevention, not military cooperation or intelligence gathering. As delegates began filing out of the chamber to contact their governments with the good news, Geo approached Ambassador Hannah with a grin on his face. Ma'am, I think we just accidentally created the galaxy's first mutual defense planning committee. Hannah looked around at the aliens who were now chatting friendly with each other, making plans to meet and share ideas. What started as her biggest diplomatic mistake had somehow turned into humanity's greatest diplomatic success. You know what this means? She said to Jiho as they gathered their things. What's that? Hannah smiled and made a note on her tablet. We need to add this to our list of scenarios we should have planned for. Successful diplomatic disasters. General Lee's hologram flickered as the connection prepared to close. Well done, Ambassador. Though next time, maybe lead with the explanation instead of the revelation. As the chamber emptied, Hannah realized that sometimes the best plans are the ones you never intended to use.